Have you ever noticed the quiet, burning ache that follows when you pour your heart out, only for the other person to brush it aside like dust? What if the intense anger you feel in that moment is not actually about their reaction, but about a much deeper wound you have been carrying for years? If you have ever felt emotionally exhausted from trying to force someone to see your pain, this is for you. Stay until the end, because the final lesson may change the way you see this pain forever. 1. The fire of being unseen. Here is a truth that is difficult to face. The tighter you hold on to the need for someone else to validate your feelings, the more you suffer. Think about how it happens in your own life. You try to explain why something hurt you. You choose your words carefully, hoping they will finally understand. But instead of empathy, you are met with a wall. They tell you that you are overreacting. They change the subject. They dismiss your reality as if it means nothing. Suddenly, a hot, rising rage takes over. You argue louder. You try to find better examples to prove your point. You replay the conversation in your mind for hours, or even days, trapped in a desperate loop of wanting them to just say, "I see why you are hurt," but they do not. And you are left completely exhausted, holding a fire they refuse to acknowledge. Buddhist wisdom teaches us that much of our suffering comes not from the original injury, but from our deep attachment to how others should respond to it. We attach our inner peace to the actions of someone else. We hand them the keys to our emotional house, and then we become profoundly angry when they do not treat our space with care. In Buddhist thought, clinging to the desire for outside validation is a heavy burden. It traps us in an endless cycle of suffering, where our emotional stability depends entirely on the unpredictable, often flawed behavior of another human being. Imagine a fierce storm sweeping through a forest. A single tree stands directly in the path of the wind. Its branches are violently shaken, its leaves torn away. The tree does not scream at the storm, demanding the wind to realize how much damage it is doing. It does not try to explain its pain to the weather. It roots itself deeper into the earth, enduring the wind, knowing that the storm is simply doing what storms do. When we endlessly argue with someone who cannot hear us, we are yelling at the wind. We are demanding the storm to apologize for being a storm. In relationships, at work, or within our own families, we do this constantly. We wait for an apology that is never coming. We craft long text messages that will only be ignored, debated, or misunderstood. We exhaust our own energy trying to force an emotionally unavailable person to suddenly possess deep empathy. We feel angry, not just because they hurt us, but because they are denying us the closure we believe we need in order to heal. Ask yourself this: what are you still trying to explain to someone who has already shown you they are not listening? What are you afraid will happen if you simply stop trying to convince them of your truth? Pause, breathe, notice the burning sensation in your chest, the tightness in your throat. Let the feeling rise without making it your identity. You do not need to fight it, but you also do not need to feed it with more words. You are entirely allowed to feel hurt. Your pain is real, but your peace cannot be held hostage by someone else's inability to see you. Because peace is not something you chase from others, it is something you make space for within yourself. But letting go of the need to explain is only the first step. And this is where the next truth begins. What if the harder you try to find the perfect words, the further you push away your own peace? Here is a truth that is deeply uncomfortable to accept. There is no combination of words that can force an unwilling heart to understand you, yet we try so desperately. You replay a painful conversation in your mind 100 times, searching for the exact moment where the communication broke down. You convince yourself that if you had just phrased it differently, if you had used a better example, or if you had remained completely calm, they would have finally grasped how much they hurt you. So, you start planning the next conversation. You draft long, carefully constructed messages in your mind. You build a flawless case, laying out the evidence of your feelings with absolute precision, waiting for the moment they finally look at you and say, "I understand." You believe that if your explanation is perfect enough, they will have no choice but to validate your pain. But this is a heavy, exhausting illusion. Buddhism reminds us that our minds are incredibly skilled at creating traps. We become attached to the idea that our intellect can solve emotional wounds. We cling to the belief that if we simply try harder, we can control another person's perception. But this deep attachment to a specific outcome is the very root of our suffering. When we tie our inner peace to the condition that someone else must first agree with us, we willingly surrender our freedom. We trap ourselves in a cycle of craving something that is entirely outside of our control. Imagine standing in front of a heavy, solid wood door that is firmly locked from the inside. You are standing in the cold, holding a ring of 1,000 different keys. You try the first key, but the door does not open. You try the second, the third, the 50th. You spend hours, then days, frantically testing every single key, exhausting yourself, bruising your hands, completely convinced that you just have not found the right one yet. But the truth is, it is not your lack of the right key that keeps the door shut. The door is locked from the inside. The person on the other side has simply chosen not to turn the handle. How often do we stand in the cold in our own lives? We draft and delete long text messages to people who dismiss us. We sit across from those we care about, pleading for them to see our perspective, changing our tone, our volume, our approach, only to be met with the same cold wall. We lie awake in the middle of the night, having imaginary arguments where we finally speak so eloquently that the other person is forced to admit they were wrong. We empty our spirit trying to unlock doors that others have chosen to keep closed. Think about your own life. How much of your precious energy is spent crafting arguments for a courtroom that does not exist? Is this endless mental rehearsal bringing you peace, or is it only feeding your fear of being invisible? Stop trying to force the door open. Breathe. Gently set down the heavy ring of keys. You do not have to keep proving your reality. Let the desire to be perfectly understood rise, and then let it pass, like a cloud drifting across the quiet sky. Do your part, speak your truth simply, and then release the outcome. Because true clarity does not come from finding the perfect explanation for them. It comes from accepting that you no longer need them to agree for your feelings to be real. But why do we fight so hard for this agreement in the first place? Because beneath every reaction is a much older fear waiting to be understood. 3. The hidden wound beneath the anger. What if your rage is not a weapon, but a shield protecting a much older sorrow? Here is the truth few people want to face. The intensity of your anger is almost always equal to the depth of your hidden pain. When someone dismisses your feelings, the reaction is instantaneous. Your heart races, your voice tightens, a sudden, intense fire rises in your chest, and you feel an overwhelming need to fight back, to defend your reality, to prove that you have a right to feel the way you do. We convince ourselves that we are furiously angry simply because of what the other person just said or did. They rolled their eyes. They interrupted. They walked away while you were speaking. But this burning rage is rarely just about the present moment. It is the accumulated weight of every time you were made to feel small. It is the heavy echo of every time you had to swallow your tears, every time you were told you were too sensitive, and every time you felt utterly alone in a crowded room. You are not just fighting the person in front of you. You are fighting for the right to exist, emotionally, in a world that has often ignored you. Buddhist wisdom teaches us to look deeply at the true nature of our emotions. In this tradition, anger is rarely seen as a primary truth. It is more like smoke. Where there is smoke, there is a fire burning beneath it, and that fire is usually grief, fear, or a deep sense of separation. Buddhism reminds us that when we suffer, our instinct is to push the pain outward, to blame, and to control. We use anger because it makes us feel powerful in the exact moments we feel the most powerless. But this attachment to anger only blinds us to our own healing. Imagine a deep, ancient lake. On the surface, a fierce wind whips the water into violent, crashing waves. Anything caught on the surface is tossed wildly, fighting the chaotic energy of the storm. But if you dive beneath those crashing waves, descending deeper and deeper into the water, the turbulence begins to fade. The noise softens. At the very bottom, it is completely still. The raging waves above are simply the surface reacting to the weather. The true depth of the lake remains quiet, holding everything in profound silence. We spend so much of our lives thrashing on the surface. When a family member brushes off our struggle, or a friend makes light of our sadness, we become the crashing wave. We use our anger to mask the quiet, devastating sadness of feeling unseen. We build walls of resentment because we mistakenly believe that our rage will protect us from being hurt again. Think about your own life. Ask yourself, what is your anger trying to protect right now? When that hot wave of frustration hits you after being dismissed, what older memory of feeling invisible is secretly being awakened? Are you angry at them, or are you mourning the fact that you still feel entirely unseen? Pause, breathe, sink beneath the surface of the wave. When the fire of anger rises, do not immediately throw it at the person standing in front of you. Let the heat exist. Observe the thought without following it. Acknowledge the hidden sadness beneath the frustration. Hold your own pain with the gentleness that others failed to give you. You do not need to weaponize your hurt to make it real. It is already real. But facing your own quiet wounds requires a courage that fighting others does not. And this is where the hardest realization of all begins. 4. Seeking water from an empty well. Why do we keep asking for comfort from the very hands that continue to drop us? Here is a truth that is painful to accept. You cannot extract depth from a shallow place. Yet, we repeat the same heartbreaking cycle. You go to a dismissive partner, hoping that today they will finally offer you the gentle listening you crave. You turn to a critical parent, believing that this time they will offer warmth instead of judgment. You share your deepest fears with a friend who always turns the conversation back to themselves. And every single time you are met with coldness, deflection, or a blank stare, that familiar burning rage returns. You feel betrayed, you feel foolish, but most of all, you feel a profound sense of rejection, wondering what is so wrong with you that they refuse to give you the understanding you so clearly need. Buddhist wisdom teaches us that suffering arises when we refuse to see reality as it is. We become deeply attached to our own illusions. We cling to the fantasy of who we want a person to be, rather than accepting who they have repeatedly shown us they are. In Buddhist thought, true acceptance means looking at a situation with complete clarity, without the distortion of our own desperate wishes. When we demand that someone provide us with an emotional depth they simply do not possess, we are fighting against reality itself. We suffer because we expect a closed flower to bloom, simply because we demand to see its colors. Imagine a weary traveler walking through a vast, sun-baked desert. Their throat is parched, and they are desperate for a drink. In the distance, they see an old stone well. They rush toward it, grab the heavy wooden bucket, and lower it down into the darkness. But when they pull the rope back up, the bucket is entirely dry. The well has been empty for years. The traveler is furious. They kick the stones. They scream down into the darkness. They sit beside the well for days, continually throwing the bucket down, weeping in anger because the well refuses to quench their thirst. But the well is not maliciously withholding water. It is not actively rejecting the traveler. It is simply empty. How often do we sit weeping beside empty wells in our own lives? We offer our most vulnerable truths to people who do not have the capacity to hold them. We take their inability to understand as a deliberate personal attack on our worth. We believe that if we just explain our thirst clearly enough, the well will magically produce water. We exhaust ourselves entirely, not realizing that we are begging for sustenance from a source that is completely barren. Think about your own life. Ask yourself, who are you repeatedly going to, expecting water, only to pull up a heavy, empty bucket? Are you truly angry at them for being unable to understand you? Or are you angry at yourself for refusing to walk away from the dry well? Pause. Breathe. Look at them clearly. See them exactly as they are, not as you desperately need them to be. Stop lowering your bucket into the dust. You do not have to keep proving your thirst to an empty well. Let the illusion break and allow reality to meet you without resistance. You cannot force someone to give what they do not have, but accepting this requires surrendering the fight. And this leads us to the silent toll this fight is taking on your soul. 5. The exhaustion of proving your pain. What if the heaviest burden you carry is not the pain itself, but the constant effort to prove that it is real? Here is the truth. Defending your emotional reality is a deeply exhausting way to live. Think about how much energy you spend gathering evidence. When someone dismisses your feelings, your mind immediately goes to work building a case. You remember exact dates, you recall specific words. You mentally organize every past grievance to show them exactly why your reaction is entirely justified. You act like an attorney in the courtroom of your own life, constantly defending your right to feel hurt. You wait for the verdict, hoping the other person will finally yield and say, "You are right, I see it now." But the trial never ends. The more you defend yourself, the more defensive they become, and you are left completely drained, emotionally bankrupt from trying to make your internal world visible to someone who refuses to look. Buddhist wisdom teaches us that resisting the present moment drains our vital energy. When we constantly fight to validate our existence through the eyes of another, we create immense internal friction. In Buddhist thought, peace is found in dropping the argument with reality. We are reminded that our suffering multiplies when we carry the heavy stone of needing to be right. The attachment to justification pulls us out of our own quiet center and traps us in an endless, agonizing cycle of mental labor. Imagine carrying a heavy, glowing coal in your bare hands just to show someone the fire that burned you. You walk miles to reach them, the heat searing your skin with every single step. When you finally arrive, you thrust your damaged hands forward, pleading, "Look how hot this is. Look at what it did to me." But they only turn their head away and say, "I do not see any fire." You are holding burning coals, destroying your own peace, just to prove to someone else that the flame was real. We do this constantly in our daily lives. We lose precious hours of sleep composing mental rebuttals after a casual dismissal from a partner. We drain our daily energy trying to make our family members admit their past mistakes. We exhaust our spirits trying to win arguments, fighting to prove our perspective to people who are already committed to misunderstanding us. We hold on to the burning coal, believing that if we can just make them see the burn, the pain will finally stop. But here is the truth. The pain stops when you drop the coal. Ask yourself, how much of your daily exhaustion comes from this endless mental courtroom? What are you afraid will happen if you simply drop the case? Does holding the burning coal make your wound heal faster, or is it only causing you deeper harm? Pause. Breathe. Feel the weight of the evidence you have been carrying. You do not need a judge to validate your injury. You do not need to present a flawless argument to prove that your heart is aching. Gently open your hands, let the ember fall to the ground, Your pain is real whether they see it or not. You do not have to endure the exhaustion of proving your own humanity. But releasing this burden requires understanding why they cannot see you in the first place. And this leads us to the quiet reality of their own limitations. 6. The mirror of their limitations. What if their inability to understand you has absolutely nothing to do with you? Here is a truth that can bring immense relief once you finally accept it. People can only meet you as deeply as they have met themselves. When someone constantly dismisses your feelings, it is incredibly easy to internalize the rejection. You assume your emotions are simply too much. You believe you are too sensitive, too complicated, or entirely unlovable. You twist yourself into knots, trying to shrink your words and your sorrow, so they will fit perfectly into the tiny space the other person has provided. But their dismissal is not a reflection of your worth. It is a reflection of their own boundaries. They are turning away from your pain because they are deeply uncomfortable with their own. Buddhist wisdom teaches us the path of compassion through deep understanding. In Buddhist thought, we are reminded that every human being is heavily conditioned by their own history, their own fears, and their own unseen suffering. When someone acts with emotional blindness or coldness, it is often because they are entirely trapped in their own ignorance. They cannot offer true presence because they do not know how to be present with themselves. To demand profound empathy from someone who has never bravely explored their own inner landscape is to expect a blind man to describe the vibrant colors of the sunrise. Imagine a very small, shallow mirror hanging on a wall. You step in front of it, hoping to see the vast, towering mountain standing directly behind you. You adjust the mirror. You change your angle. You wipe the glass completely clean. But no matter how hard you try, the mirror only shows a tiny, distorted fragment of the stone. You become frustrated, wondering why the mountain looks so small, so broken, so insignificant. But there is nothing wrong with the mountain. The mountain is majestic. The mountain is real. The problem is simply that the mirror is entirely too small to hold its reflection. We do this constantly when we look for our own value in the eyes of emotionally limited people. We ask a distant parent to validate our complex sorrow. We ask a guarded partner to hold our deepest fears. When they quickly change the subject or casually tell us to just get over it, we instantly believe our mountain of feelings is wrong. We forget that they are simply a shallow mirror. They are giving us the only reaction they are capable of giving. They cannot reflect a depth they do not possess. Think about your own life. Who are you currently using as a mirror to measure your own truth? Ask yourself, are you truly asking to be seen, or are you unknowingly punishing yourself by demanding a small mirror to reflect a vast and open sky? Pause, breathe, step away from the glass. Stop bending your soul to fit into their limited frame. Let them exist exactly as they are, with all of their shortcomings, without making it a story about your own inadequacy. You do not have to shrink to make their dismissal feel logical. You can allow them their limitations without letting those limitations define your reality. Because realizing they cannot see you is the exact moment you must choose to finally see yourself. And this is where the profound power of the pause comes in. 7. The pause between reaction and freedom. What if your greatest power is not found in the words you desperately want to say, but in the silence you choose the exact moment you are hurt? Here is the truth that requires profound courage. Your immediate reaction is rarely your true voice. Think about the split second after someone brushes off your feelings. The rush of energy is completely overwhelming. The instinct is to strike back immediately, to raise your voice, to fire off a long defensive text message, or to double down and explain yourself one more time. You feel an agonizing pressure in your chest, a false urgency that tells you if you do not respond right this very second, they will get away with it. You believe that if you do not fight back immediately, your feelings will be erased entirely. So, you react. You jump straight into the chaos, matching their energy, completely losing your own center in the desperate rush to be heard. But this frantic reaction does not bring you peace. It only leaves you feeling more hollow. Buddhist wisdom teaches us about the profound sacredness of the pause. In Buddhist thought, mindfulness is not simply about sitting quietly in meditation. It is about creating a space between what happens to you and how you choose to respond. We are reminded that an emotion is just a visitor passing through the house of your mind. You do not have to invite it to sit down, and you certainly do not have to let it take over the entire home. When we instantly react to someone's dismissal, we become totally consumed by their negative energy. But in the tiny, quiet space before we react, all of our human freedom exists. Imagine holding a glass jar filled with water and heavy, dark mud. When someone dismisses you, it is as if the jar has been violently shaken. The water becomes entirely clouded, dark, and chaotic. You cannot see through it. When we react immediately, when we argue, plead, and shout, we are continuing to shake the jar. We think we are fixing the problem, but we are only keeping the dirt suspended in the water. But if you simply set the jar down on a quiet table and wait, the dirt slowly begins to settle on its own. The water naturally becomes clear again. We forget to set the jar down in our daily lives. When a family member trivializes our sadness, or a friend makes a careless comment, our immediate instinct is to shake the water. We dive into the argument. We lose our clarity because we refuse to tolerate the temporary discomfort of sitting in the silence. We believe we must fight the dirt to make the water clear, when all we actually need to do is be still. Think about your own life. Ask yourself, what are you trying to protect in that frantic rush to respond? What would happen if, the next time you were dismissed, you chose to just sit with the uncomfortable silence instead of filling it with your defense? Pause, breathe, notice the desperate urge to react, and gently let it pass. You do not have to jump into the storm they created. Let the feeling rise. Let the water remain cloudy for a moment, and simply wait for the mud to settle. You do not lose your truth by refusing to argue about it, because true clarity is never found in the noisy desperation of an argument. It is found by stepping completely out of the fight. And this leads to the hardest, most liberating choice of all. 8. Choosing clarity over agreement. What if your peace requires you to surrender the one thing you desire most? Their agreement. Here is the quiet truth that changes everything. You do not need someone else to agree with your pain for it to be completely valid. We spend so much of our lives believing that emotional clarity requires a consensus. When a painful event happens and someone dismisses your feelings, your first instinct is to pull them back into the details. You want to make sure you are both looking at the exact same reality. You feel a desperate need for them to nod their head and say, "Yes, that is exactly how it happened. You are right." You convince yourself that until you reach this shared agreement, the conflict cannot truly be resolved and the wound cannot heal. You become anchored to their perception. If they say it was not a big deal, you start to doubt your own sanity. If they rewrite the history of the conversation, you frantically try to correct the record. You are caught in a relentless tug-of-war, believing that clarity only exists when both sides of the rope are pulled with the exact same understanding. But this is a painful, exhausting illusion. Buddhist wisdom teaches that profound clarity comes from within, not from the external validation of the world. When we desperately crave someone's agreement, we are practicing deep attachment to an outcome we cannot control. We hand over our internal compass to someone else, allowing their confusion to dictate our direction. In Buddhist thought, the ultimate freedom arises when we stop fighting the true nature of things. If a person is deeply committed to misunderstanding you because of their own pride, their own fear, or their own ignorance, arguing with them does not create clarity, it only creates more suffering. True clear seeing is standing firmly in your own experience without needing a chorus of voices to applaud it. It is knowing the truth of your own heart, even when you are entirely alone in that knowledge. Imagine you are sitting in a quiet, dark room, holding a brightly burning candle. The light fills the immediate space around you, offering warmth and vision. Suddenly, someone walks into the room with their eyes firmly closed. They complain loudly that the room is entirely dark. They insist there is no light anywhere. Instead of simply enjoying the warmth, you stand up, deeply offended. You argue with them. You push the candle closer to their face, demanding that they feel the heat. You scream at them to just open their eyes and admit the light is real. You become so intensely consumed by their stubborn denial that you forget to use the warmth of the flame for your own comfort. You drain your own vital energy fighting their darkness rather than simply letting your light shine. How often do we argue with people who are determined to walk through life with their eyes tightly closed? We stay locked in endless, circling, text message debates with friends who refuse to acknowledge our reality. We try to force a dismissive partner to accept our exact version of a conflict, hoping that logic will somehow conquer their emotional distance. We mentally draft perfect essays, fighting to make them see the light. We wait for a closure that is entirely locked inside someone else's mind, refusing to move forward until they hand us the key. We sacrifice our precious inner peace on the altar of wanting to be right. Think about your own life right now. Ask yourself, are you willing to let them be wrong about you? What would happen if you simply accepted that they will never understand your side of the story, and you chose to be completely at peace with that? Is your need for their agreement stronger than your desire for your own freedom? Pause. Breathe. Gently step back from the invisible tug-of-war. Let them hold their misunderstanding. You do not need to blow out your own candle just because they refuse to open their eyes. You are fully allowed to possess a clarity that they do not share. Letting go of the desperate need for agreement is the exact moment you reclaim your power, because true healing does not begin when the other person finally understands you. It begins when you decide to stop waiting for them to catch up. And this brings us to the final realization of this journey. 9. Returning to your own peace. We began this journey looking at that quiet, burning ache, the heavy, exhausting rage that floods your chest when you pour your heart out, only to watch someone brush your feelings aside like dust. For so long, you believed that the only way to extinguish that fire was to force them to see the flames. You were absolutely convinced that your true healing was waiting on the other side of their apology. But now you know the truth. You are no longer standing in the storm, demanding the wind to realize how much damage it is doing. You have gently set down the heavy ring of keys, realizing you do not have to spend your life trying to unlock doors that others have chosen to keep closed. You have recognized the empty well, and you have finally stopped lowering your bucket into the dust. You have dropped the burning coal of justification, understanding that their shallow mirror could never hold the vastness of your mountain. You have stepped out of the endless mental courtroom. You have chosen the sacred pause. You have chosen clarity over the agonizing need for their agreement. In Buddhist wisdom, the ultimate act of letting go is not about cutting people off in a sudden fit of anger, nor is it about building a heavy fortress around your heart. It is simply about releasing the heavy rope of attachment. It is the deep, profound acceptance that your inner sanctuary belongs to you and you alone. You stop trying to force the external world to soothe your internal wounds. When you finally release the desperate need to be perfectly understood by others, a tremendous amount of vital energy returns to your own spirit. The noise fades. The dirt in the jar settles completely. You realize that you were never actually waiting for their validation. You were simply waiting for your own permission to let it go. Imagine a quiet river flowing steadily toward the vast, open ocean. Along the banks, there are jagged rocks, sharp stones, and fallen branches that constantly disrupt the water, creating splashes and temporary chaos. But the river does not stop to explain itself to the rocks. It does not try to convince the branches to move out of the way. It does not become angry at the stones for being hard. It simply flows gracefully around them, remaining deeply committed to its own journey toward the sea. For so long, you have stopped your own beautiful flow to argue with the stones. You have exhausted yourself trying to soften the jagged rocks. But now, you are simply the water, moving forward, untouched, unbothered, completely free. Think about the profound freedom in this choice. Tomorrow, someone may dismiss you again. They may completely misunderstand your words or casually minimize your experience. But this time, you do not have to react. You do not have to become the crashing wave. You can simply observe their limitation, hold your own pain with gentleness, and walk away with your peace entirely intact. Your reality does not require their signature to be true. Your heart does not need their permission to heal. Pause, breathe, feel the quiet, expansive space you have created by finally laying down the fight. Let that sink in. The trial is over. You do not have to prove your humanity to anyone anymore. If these lessons touched your heart, share this video with someone who may need a little more peace today. You can let go now.